us today for this brilliant opportunity to learn more about working with the Wattpad Studios team and to gain some really exciting exclusive insight on the two properties that are available for adaptation, Bro Code and How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse. If you have any questions during this panel, if you can pop them into the chat, we should have some time at the end of this conversation to circle back to those and answer a few of those. But for the majority of the panel, we'll be talking with the Wattpad Studios team and wonderful writers here today. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Wattpad Studios company, Wattpad Studios discovers untapped talented writers on Wattpad and connects their stories, which have over 80 million readers and counting, to global multimedia entertainment companies. Their previous adaptations, you may know some of them, have included the Emmy Award nominated Hulu series Light as a Feather, the feature film After, which was one of the top grossing indie films in 2019, and The Kissing Booth, which is one of the most watched films on Netflix ever. And here with us today from the incredible Wattpad Studios team is the General Manager of Wattpad Studios, Aaron Levitz. We have the Head of Content Development and Production, Eric Lehrman, and the Senior Director of Content Development and Production, Lindsay Ramey, as well as the Head of Asia at Wattpad Studios, Dexter Ong. I'm also really thrilled that we have with us today the two wonderful authors of the titles up for adaptation. We have Elizabeth A. Siebert, who, in addition to being a talented writer, has worn many hats, including as a lifeguard, finance reporter, marketer, and aspiring superhero. She's amassed over 30 million reads on Wattpad, including her debut novel, which we'll be discussing today, Bro Code, which is a teen coming-of-age romance that explores what happens when love gets in the way of friendship. We also have the wonderful Kate J Squires. She's a Waddy Award-winning author and proud Australian. She's currently in Melbourne, who has also had an interesting career, including working for Disney, fire dancing, and performing with sea lions. Kate has many successful stories published within and beyond the Wattpad platform, including How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse, which is a genre-bending epic story about one woman's guide to falling in love, getting fit, and surviving the end of the world. Also joining us is my colleague and content director at Screen Queensland, Amy Parry, who manages our development programs. She'll be joining us a little later to take a deeper dive into these stories with Elizabeth and Kate and to talk about how to submit a competitive pitch. But first, I'll be talking with the Wattpad Studios team. So Aaron, this is obviously a really incredible opportunity to work with some properties with an inbuilt community on the Wattpad platform. And as I mentioned before, you have over 80 million readers on that Wattpad platform. Can you tell us a little bit about the Wattpad community, who they are, and how they're different from a regular audience?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thank you for having us here today. And, thank you all for taking the time to kind of listen to us. Just as a really quick description of Wattpad Studios, they did a great job of explaining it, but there's multiple parts to it. It's the entertainment that we're talking about. It's a publishing division, actually. Elizabeth's book just came out through Wattpad Books a couple of weeks ago. So, and we try to combine those two things to really create entertainment off the Wattpad platform. But, as you rightly pointed out, we have about 80, actually close to 90 million users now on the platform coming every month to read, write, and tell stories. And I think what's different, especially when you're talking about adaptations that are coming from underlying IP, that are coming from existing story, is that if you think about adaptation of a book that you bought off a shelf that started as a manuscript, it's very transactional in its nature, right? You go to the store, you buy a book, you enjoy it, you call up an agent, you option it, and you go to school writing it, etc. The way Wattpad thinks about and discovers stories is completely different. First of all, a lot of the stories written on Wattpad are written serially. They're written chapter by chapter. And that means in that moment that Elizabeth posts chapter 1 and then is waiting to post chapter 2, the audience has a chance to engage with her, with our author. I don't know where you are in the boxes, Elizabeth. So, and it's that moment of engagement, that moment of commentary, and that moment of discussion that happens that totally changes the experience for our readers. And in fact, we don't even call them readers, we call them fans. And what both of these amazing writers have been able to do is engage that community, talk to them while they're going through the process of creating, bring them along, and give those fans a little bit of ownership of what's going on. And that's why when we see adaptations happening, that we are having such great success, because the fans who fell in love with it on Wattpad, these authors talk directly to them. We can talk directly to them as Wattpad, and we're making sure they're showing up, whether it's at a box office, to a streaming service, as a digital platform, or to bookshelves everywhere. So that's the first thing. And then literally we get to understand what the fans love when we adapt. We don't have to guess. I mean, of course, Kate and Lizzie know the parts that their audiences loved, but we get to look at their comments. We get to look at the underlying context and subtext that really brought those fans not only to like a specific chapter, but down to a specific paragraph. And that's a really powerful tool that the creative industry has never had. I mean, we've all been in a creative room where you don't know whether to go left and right. And if the fans can give you just like that inkling of which way to go, it's actually such a relief as a creative. And it's not about creating by numbers. It's not like you must do what the fans say all the time. There's so many brilliant creators listening in right now who are going to have their own takes on these stories and their own adaptation methodologies. But it is about like that moment of light in the darkness when we are trying to create something beautiful together.
Fantastic. And can you talk to us about an adaptation of something that's gone from Wattpad to screen before, and what that process was like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had so many good examples now. I'm really proud the team over kind of our 4 years. It actually started a long time ago. In 2014, we had, for 6 seasons, the top youth show in Philippines called Wattpad Presents. And that was actually the first TV series we ever did. But probably maybe the best case study to talk about today is After. And After, I love to talk about because it has traveled the full gambit of what Wattpad Studios can bring to a project. So Anna Todd started writing this story, 1,000,000 words, almost completely on her phone. A 3-book series on Wattpad. And we met Anna, well, actually, we should say we met After in about 2013. And, as a tech platform, we talk about data a lot. And this might be one of the most data found books ever, because the person who basically ran our servers came to us and said, hey, did you know like our servers almost blacked out because so many people went to this one story called After? What's it about? And all the content people, we all sat at one little table. There's only like 15 of us in the company at that time. And we all looked at each other and goes, yeah, what's After? So we all ran and read it, fell in love with it, and said, this is the first property that Wattpad's going to get involved with. So, she came up to Toronto in February. She was living in the southern states at the time. February in Toronto, it's cold. She showed up in a jean jacket. So after getting her a winter jacket, we talked to her about what her plans were for the book, and were able to decide to partner together. First step was Simon & Schuster. We had them publish the book, not just in the US, but globally. I think it's available in 39 languages now. And we've sold tens of millions of copies globally. It's been a New York Times bestseller, actually 3 separate times now. It's been #1, I think, in 10 countries. And Anna's connection to her fandom is unlike almost any other author you can think of. I mean, the most famous authors in the world could basically walk past you and you wouldn't know them. I have walked down a random street in different cities with Anna and watched young women scream like the Beatles were walking with us. So that is like the visceral connection the fandom has. So from there, we set the movie up as an indie film. The first one came out in 2019 on April 12th. And we developed it with, really phenomenal producing partners like Jen Gibgot from Osprey Entertainment, who did like the Step Up movies, for example. Anna was, of course, part of the process as a producer on that film as well. And we launched this little indie movie that probably most people on here have never read, let alone heard of, and became kind of a top 5 indie movie last year, doing about 70 million plus at the box office globally. We continued that streak with After We Collided, which came out, I do not think it's out in Australia yet, but it came out in Europe in early September, comes out in the States later this week. And we basically, in the middle of a pandemic, have crossed 40 million and are basically the number 1 or 2 movie across Europe in its launch. I think we launched in Belgium this week. We were number 1 there.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. It's, you don't expect this in a pandemic, except we kind of do expect our fans to get out and support our writers. So this is kind of the power that if you follow, both of these writers understand community. If you follow Anna on Twitter, or either these two in their social networks, that interaction is what's different here. And if you learn to embrace it, love it, they pay you back with really successful films, TV, digital series, because they want to see your vision on this. And that's probably the one case study, at least to the few that I could chat about.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Eric, it might be great, just on that note, to hear a little bit more about what role the Wattpad community plays in developing a screen property, and actually maybe just taking a step back about making the choice to I guess with After, for example, how you decided to make that into a feature film rather than a series. Were you drawn by the story or the demographics of the audience? It'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I guess adapting a Wattpad story, we're talking about adapting from source material or adapting intellectual property. And as Aaron explained, the road to creating that story is in many ways very different from traditional novel writing or publishing. The work of adapting in many ways is shares a lot of what it's like to adapt a novel or a comic book. And that's something obviously that Hollywood has done forever. And I think if you go even further back, it's kind of the underpinnings of like all Western storytelling. If you go back to like Homer writing about the Iliad, writing about the Trojan War, it's like he's choosing a subject that has a built-in, it's name recognition. People know that story. It's like kind of tried and true that people want to hear that story. So I think it's something we've been doing for a long time. And we do it because it gives you, a character, a premise, a framework for a plot, and a built-in fan base. But then, with those are a lot of key ingredients, but it's not everything. There's still a lot that we're going to look to from whoever's adapting that story to the screen, be it TV or film, to bring something that's not there yet, and to make it into a new medium. And I think there's lots of examples of ways that things like After, that there were changes made from the books to the film, things that were perfect for the medium it was written in. Like for all of the fans of After, there's kind of fights and breakups, which are perfect for the serialized nature of that story. When you get to a film, you then say, okay, how do I fit that into a 3-act structure and a character arc, with a beginning, middle, and end? But there's so much value and in finding the essence of what it was that audiences loved about that initial book. And that's, I think, when you talk about what's the involvement of the Wattpad community, that's baked into the story, like Aaron already said. Just where we are now, baked into both of your books, is the involvement of the community. I think later we'd love to hear about your writing process, but I imagine if it's like so many other Wattpad writers, there was a back and forth with the audience as you were writing, and that influenced your story. So that's an influence of the community already in that source material. Then, like we've talked about, we're gonna use a lot of tools. It sounds scary, our data tools, story DNA and things like that we do. But those are really just tools that are going to help our creators drill down and find out what is it about that story that audiences loved, what was resonating, what were they commenting on, what were they rereading. what in that behavior is telling us, giving us clues and tools as far as what we should pay attention to when we're adapting that story. And that also goes into just why we're sitting here talking about these two stories. All those tools, and the behavior of the community helped us arrive at knowing that these are two stories that audiences love and want to see on screen.
That's it. And I think a lot of the writers and producers who are tuning in today are conscious of the fact that these properties do have a lot of fans already, and how to kind of manage that relationship with the fans and not to disappoint them, I suppose, in the adaptation, but to still have some creative freedom. And it'd be great, Lindsay, to hear from you about what those screenwriters and producers should consider when adapting from Wattpad to the screen, and how important it is, I suppose, to stay faithful to the original material.
Sure. I think that what we've been lucky to have with these stories is a really great blueprint. And, whenever, as, Eric has touched upon, is that the medium of books and the medium of film are two separate things and have different structures. And so whenever you are going through that process, what we always find the most important thing to do is really maintaining the essence and the spirit of the author's intention and voice. Because that's really the most powerful thing that Lizzie and Kate really bring to the page, is their unique voice that really helps the story resonate. And so that's really like the big halo of wanting to take over from book to film. And it's funny, like I worked for a huge director who adapted Born, and like he said his stories were like so Byzantine and really kind of extremely like tired structure. And he always said too, like the essence only mattered, and then no one even realized like half of the things that he changed were changed. So it's just funny that like so many people at all levels really know the importance of the essence of a book when adapting it. I think also like what both Aaron and Eric have touched on is that we're so fortunate to have what we call the author and the comment insights, to use some Wattpad language. And it is that that blueprint, that track of the comments that the readers leave within the story per paragraph. And then also that relationship that Lizzie and Kate both have with their readership. So that gives us two different perspectives as developers that we wouldn't ever have otherwise. And so what we usually take away and can be a part of, an important part of the development process, and being aware of how to maintain the core readership and all the beautiful work that the authors did, is the insights that the authors have of what their audience loved, and direct conversations, and also the kind of the breakdown of where within the story were the most highlighted points that everyone commented on. And again, it's still not taking it, it's not a one-for-one, apples to apples translation of those highlights, but it's still characterizing the essence of those important beats that everyone really loved within the story, and how to fit them in into the adaptation in a meaningful, an authentic, original way that a screenwriter can then adapt whenever they're bringing it to the screen.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay. And such a unique advantage, I think, for any writer or producer to have jumping into development as well. It's incredible. Dexter, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the process of working with Screen Queensland in order to identify those two properties and really to understand what stood out about Bro Code and How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think we the priority of our partnership when we were talking, Amy and Dia, was to actually find stories for a passionate global fan base. So we really use our data and our machine learning to actually identify trending stories that are not only resonating globally with a huge global fan base amongst our 90 million users, but we also wanted to find stories that were also trending amongst our users in Australia. We also wanted to showcase a good diverse mix of popular stories across different genres, writers from different backgrounds, and also looking at stories that are already hugely popular, like Bro Code, which has amassed 20 million reads, but also newer stories that are up and coming, and we know from our experience, from our data, can be the next big hit. In this case, How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse. That is a new story that just started last year. Also, both Lizzie and Kate have been very early members of our Wattpad Stars program, where we identify and support our most promising and talented writers who have consistently been publishing stories that our community loves. Yeah, and I think finally, how we got to the 2 shortlists, we actually worked closely with the Screen Queensland team, you, Dia and Amy, to actually draw on your expertise and your expectations of your initiative to come up with this final shortlist of these 2 titles. So it was that process that how we got to the shortlist of these 2. And we're very excited about these 2 titles.
Yes, so I think there's so much potential in both Bro Code and How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse. In that they're certainly very commercial, but they both have really distinct points of difference and great characters within them. And with Bro Code and actually with How to Lose Weight, there's a really great suggestion of structure that happens through the different rules of the code and or with the epic journey that happens throughout How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Amy Parry now, who runs our development programs here, and she's going to take a deeper dive into those 2 properties now with Lizzie and Kate. I'm going to be in the chat, so if anyone has any questions for the panelists so far, or while Lizzie and Kate are talking with Amy, please pop them in there, and then at the end of the session we should have an opportunity to put some of those forward to the panelists.
Thanks, Dia. Firstly, I'm so excited to get the chance to speak to both of the authors. I think I'm your biggest fangirl. We got to pick you out of like some fantastic selections that Wattpad put forward to us, and in reading your both of your books, I just completely fell in love, and I'm so excited that we get this opportunity to partner with Wattpad, but to also offer these incredible properties to our Queensland talent to adapt and take forward. And I think one of the most exciting things about this opportunity is that you have both had the Wattpad audience when you've been writing and developing your books, and the opportunity for our film practitioners now is to use that same fan base, that same audience, and present them with kind of a sample of what an adaptation might be, and have them feed into that process, which is really, I think, kind of a world first. So we're super excited to see what our talent can do with your incredible titles. Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you and talk a little bit about Bro Code. It's amassed over 21 million reads on Wattpad, which is just incredible. And it'll be released, I know it's already been released over in the States, but it will be released in Australian bookstores in November. What do you think it is about Bro Code that has made it so popular with readers?
Yeah, thank you. There are a couple things. First is that it's a romantic comedy, which everyone in the world, I think, loves, but especially on Wattpad. And the second is that it takes a lot of tropes that Wattpad stories generally use in romance, but it takes several of them. So people like that, and those are the best friend siblings trope, which is also in the kissing booth. And it's like the main character falls in love with their best friend's sibling, but with the Bro Code, it's flipped. So it's told from the male perspective. And when I was writing the Bro Code, it was the only main story at the time that people were reading where it was told from the male perspective. And I know there are others now, and they're also very popular, but that was new and fresh. So that's one of the things people really liked about it. Another is that there's secret dating. there's a sports romance where the main characters all play soccer. Wattpad loves sports and jocks and bros. And the other trope is the two main characters, Nick and Eliza, start as childhood friends and go to lovers. And so friends to lovers is another big romance trope. So the Bro Code takes those elements, which each spin like a classic love story, and then it adds tension to it, which is the brother, is Carter going to find out about the secret romance? And that's what gets people to keep reading, is that tension. And the whole idea is like, well, what will happen when he does? So there's that. And then people also love the comedic aspect of it. The story takes a lot of slang. It's like, I think it's hip, and I guess the readers think it's hip too. So there's a lot of slang, and there are a lot of bros. And the story takes the idea of a honestly stereotypical cliche bro, and it turns it up to 11, so people can see it and have fun with it. Everyone knows someone kind of like the bros in the story, to the point where they're kind of a caricature, which makes it more fun for them. But that's one of the things that people find the most entertaining about it, is the bros. And then lastly, the readers really like that the characters are in high school, as opposed to college. And they also like that school is a really big part of the story. So the characters go to class, they have after-school sports, they have homework, and it's those little moments that make the story more relatable, in summary.
Yeah. And did you find that reflected in your audience? They were mostly kind of high school age students who were reading along with you?
Yeah, the Bro Code has been on Wattpad since 2012, but my new readers tend to always be like 13 to 17-year-olds, so late middle school, early high school, and they definitely always comment on the high school parts. They love that there are sports, and they love that there's homework in the story.
And it has, I think Dia kind of mentioned before, both of your books have this great structure that you've baked into how they're told, and yours are through the rules, through the codes that get broken. Was there a favorite code for you to break when you were setting that up? And can you talk a little bit more about how the rules kind of played into you revealing the story?
Yeah, the codes are a good example of the story being like kind of grounded, but then also like turned up to 11, and it makes it ridiculous. So the first rules are like kind of bro-y rules that at least everyone in the States knows generally. Like, people have heard of the rule bros before hoes, like whether or not you like it, people have heard of that. And so I took that like idea and put that in the story, and then also added silly ones. So like a bro will not back down from spicy foods, or bros like always wear shorts under their pants. So people have fun reading those, and it also sets the tone that there are some more serious rules, like bros before hoes, that the story is going to have to talk about. So it does that in kind of a playful way.
Yeah, great. And Kate, just switching over to you for a second, your story, How to Lose Weight and Survive the Apocalypse, is set in Australia. It's a multi-character, genre-bending adventure story set in an apocalyptic Australia. How did this story come about?
First of all, I think it needs an acronym, because I didn't realize when I wrote the title people would actually have to say it out loud at some stage. So, but the acronym is like so it doesn't kind of roll off the tongue there. Yeah, I don't know how this one came about, but I do know that I started it before COVID happened, which was funny because I think people kind of thought I wrote it in response to like the world ending with a pandemic, and I didn't. You can date check it. I started it back when the world was relatively normal, almost exactly this time last year. And I sort of explain it in my author notes at the start of the book, but I really like the idea of how a disaster novel or a disaster movie can really pull you out of where you're at. Like there's a reason that we love watching disaster movies normally when the world is not too disastrous, because it kind of pulls us out of our own circumstance. And so it's a nice alternative to be like, well, at least the sky's not falling, or there's not a giant volcano in my backyard. And I think mentally we kind of walk out of those films or those books feeling a little more settled about the universe. And so it was funny when COVID really started to kick off, and in Australia we went into our first lockdown in March. I stopped writing for a little while. I found that I couldn't actually deal with the real world kind of ending at the same time as writing this book. It wasn't escapism anymore. It was suddenly way less amusing to write. And so I did take a little break, and then I finished it off. Still in a really serious stage 4 lockdown. I'm in Melbourne, so we have one of the most severe lockdowns in the world at the moment. We're not allowed to go more than 5 kilometers from our houses. I haven't been able to see my parents for about 6 months now. So it's pretty full on. So yeah, I guess COVID was really unexpected, but there were elements that I was able to kind of incorporate into the book in amusing ways, like people hoarding toilet paper, and why that wouldn't really be a thing if the world was actually ending. You wouldn't probably go to toilet paper as your first useful item to grab off the shelves. But I think there are some good universal truths in what I wrote that are probably have been confirmed by COVID, that in any disaster, in any major world event, there are different ways that people react. And sometimes, and I think that's really universal, like sometimes people, they freeze, they don't know what to do, they fight, going out and trying to empty the shelves. And sometimes people fly, sometimes they literally just flee the situation or completely shut down and shut off. So it was timely to have a pandemic, I guess, happening at the same time as this book was written.
I think that's really interesting to touch on the pandemic and how it's kind of played into you finishing the book. And for me, reading it, it still had this sense of escapism, because you incorporate the beautiful Australian country in the journey that they take down from it's Sydney, isn't it, to Tasmania, and they have to cross the strait. And it's just the way that you use the Australian landscape, I think, really lends itself to that escapism. I think your audience is very engaged. As Dexter said, it's a newer book, so it hasn't, it's still amassed over 600,000 reads, I think. But the completion rate of those readers reading from beginning to end and really being engaged with the story is just incredible. Are there moments from the story or characters in the story that have been fan favorites?
Yeah, and some of them were kind of surprising. So Simon was one that kind of took me by surprise. So for those who've read the book, Simon is kind of this grizzled, grumpy, alcoholic agitator who's sort of, I don't think I ever specify, but he's kind of in his 60s. And he's not what you call like a typical Wattpad hero. And he's actually based on a real dude that I know who's a dad of a friend of mine, and he's just someone who deliberately kind of winds people up, and you never quite know if he's kidding or if he's serious, because he has this massive beard and he just kind of hides his grin behind it. And so he was one that I was pretty surprised. People were like, oh my God, we love Simon. And particularly because I use a lot of Australian lingo when I write as well. I love my country and I'm proud of Australia, and Wattpad has been amazing because, I've been writing for quite a long time now, and often I would try to set things in the US. I've lived in the US before because it's kind of a known entity. If you set something in New York, people kind of get it. But one of the joys of Wattpad is being able to set things in Australia and introduce people to the country, you know, whether it's traveling through the countryside or just defining the fact that yeah, nah means something completely different to nah, yeah, which I think is a great contribution to the international vocabulary of the world. So yeah, Simon is quite an Ocker Aussie in some of the ways that he speaks. But I really, in this book, I wanted to highlight a non-binary character as well, which is how the character of Bailey was created in the novel. And in my day job at the moment, I'm lucky enough to work with an LGBTIQ team, and I've always been a strong ally for rainbow communities, but I worked specifically with a non-binary person, and I was amazed at how challenging it was for my vocabulary. I could not get the hang of the they them pronouns and really struggled, and it was something that surprised me. So I'm like, this is, you know, I'm an ally, I'm an advocate, and I believe in this, and I just couldn't get this person's pronouns right, and I was mortified. So of course my way to process anything is to put it in a book. So I wrote the character Bailey partly just to practice using they them pronouns, and also to explain to others who may not have had the privilege of spending time with a non-binary person, and allow them to connect and be like, oh, this is still like a human person, and to have empathy for somebody in that situation. And the character Bailey has been really popular, which is so lovely. And I asked the non-binary co-worker, I asked them to read the story and sort of check it for me and be like, look, have I kind of gotten this right? If there's anything horrendously or embarrassing wrong, can you tell me? And they were so moved. They sent me this really beautiful email where they said that they had cried because they'd not read a book with a non-binary main character in it before, and that they were so appreciative to have that kind of representation. So Bailey does have a relationship within the book as well, and that relationship has also been really popular. I read every single comment on every book that I'm currently writing. So it's always nice to see that feedback in real time. It's one of the joys of Wattpad that, you know, if I can put a relationship out there and be like, nah, people like it as much as I do, that's so great.
And I guess Carla, your protagonist, is a little bit older than the protagonist in The Bro Code, who's high school students. Has that influenced who has been gravitating to your book and the age of the audience reading? Or speak a little bit about what age your audience is and how that audience skews.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been on Wattpad for about 7 years now. So I feel like a lot of my audience have kind of grown up a bit with me as well. So my protagonists tend to be kind of in their 20s, and I would say more in the new adult range than the young adult range. But you know, generally, I would say the average Wattpad reader has like a really curious, open mind. There's so many readers from around the world that I don't get too concerned with trying to nail down like, oh, we can only have a character that's this age or that age. And certainly my supporting characters are from every age group. As I said, J Simon's much older. I've set Bailey as a bit younger, and Bailey's love interest, I think, is only 19 in the book. So it's, I think when you have varied supporting characters, there's something kind of for everybody, and you're not necessarily just trapped in the box of, oh, I only have one person to root for as well. The other thing I did with this book that I thought was, I wasn't sure how it was going to kind of play out, but it came off the concept of shows like Grey's Anatomy that do blind casting. So they don't have specific looks in mind when they cast for a character. They just kind of throw up in the casting pool. And what I found is when I read a book, particularly a book that's written in the first person, I kind of imagine that the protagonist is like me. Generally, that I'm a bit selfish that way. And so then I'll read something that'll be like, oh, you know, her poker straight hair or her ice blue eyes, and I'm like, oh, Lucian's gone. This is definitely not me. But I have the privilege of being, you know, a white woman. Like most protagonists are going to be generally white girls or white women, and so it's not so much of a stretch. And I had this sort of like, you know, it must be frustrating, I guess, in a way, when you're constantly reading books where the protagonists look nothing like you. So in the book, it's done deliberately that neither of my two romantic leads, both Carla and Ruben, they don't have any physical descriptors on them whatsoever. And I state that at the top of the book, that whatever you want these two characters to look like, if you want them to be Japanese or Aboriginal or anything in between, that is for you and your imagination to go to town with. So I think the only physical descriptors they get, obviously, is Carla's weight, as she is a curvy heroine, and Ruben has a short beard because he can't shave. That's it. Everything else is up for grabs. So it's it allows the reader, I think, no matter what their age, to kind of connect with characters on a human level. And I think that crosses the boundaries of just being like, oh no, my protagonist has to be a certain age.
And so I guess this is both for Elizabeth and you, Kate. As you were writing the books, did you release a kind of chapter at a time and wait for the audience's input to kind of, or did the audience have any say or weight when you were developing the next chapter, or if there was a character that they were really responding to, did you give that character more time? Can you talk a little bit about that process of using the Wattpad platform and your audience?
So I probably took the most feedback. I finished writing the Bro Code on Wattpad in 2013, and then it was published by Wattpad Books this year. So I took a lot of feedback from the Wattpad original version into the published version now. And a lot of people's feedback were around the minor characters. In the original version, Nick's father has cancer and like an illness, and people like, I don't know, it feels weird. People like didn't care about that. They cared a lot more about just Nick's relationship with just having a father. So then when I made it into the published version, Nick's dad is a soccer coach, and the conflicts they have are a lot more internal rather than like external because of the cancer. I also had to update the story a lot to address toxic masculinity and the Me Too movement, because when I wrote it in 2013, that stuff was just like coming to the forefront. So in the published version, which I think is the one being produced, there's a lot more emphasis on how the Bro Code can be dangerous, but also how it affects like all high schoolers. So they're like in this environment and they're having these influences that they like might not even realize. And through the story shows like how they can identify those influences and how they can grapple with them, and how it can be both dangerous and inspiring. So the fans wanted all of that. And I took a lot of their comments and influences to add those aspects into it.
And how about you, Kate? Did you use the audience when you were finishing your story?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes just for encouragement, because it was funny, just touching what Aaron said before, like writing is so solitary that one of the reasons I love Wattpad is because like writing is sometimes just like screaming into the void, and you might not know for like 3 years until a book maybe might get published down the track how people feel about it. And so Wattpad is that real instantaneous, like the second I put this up, I'm gonna know if I have taken a wrong turn pretty quickly, and people will definitely tell you, which is what I love now. So I think between all my books I have over 20 million reads, and I've got about 100,000 people that follow me. So it like having that pool to draw from is amazing. There have definitely been books in the past where I might pose a question at the end of the chapter, where what I'm really doing is filling people out for what's going to happen next, as I tend to do. I post in real time because I find the feedback is that useful. This book, I don't think I made any wrong turns that readers really had to correct me on. There were definitely some strong reactions to Carla's relationship with her ex. So she had an ex who was emotionally, sexually, and reproductively abusive. And these are types of abuse that don't always get spoken about. At the moment, I think everyone's kind of aware of like physical abuse and what that looks like, but some of those more subtle nuances around coercive control, and readers would be commenting like, oh my God, she's so stupid. Like, why would you put up with that? And why would you stay if somebody said that to you? And why would they do that? Which I don't necessarily see as a bad thing. I think anytime you get a strong reaction from people, it means that they're engaged. So I would much rather have people jumping on and you know, screaming that this is really frustrating to them doesn't necessarily make it the wrong direction. It means that they're really engaging with it. I think talking about these kinds of topics holds up a mirror, particularly for our young women, that if they can identify a character in a book, should not allow herself to be treated that way. That, you know, maybe there's going to be a situation in their own life where somebody might point out that they also have worth and should not be treated that way by their partner or someone who says that they love them. So it is always just an absolute privilege to have reader feedback. And I have said publicly before, I would not still be writing if it wasn't for Wattpad. I would not be writing if it wasn't for my readers, who I love and adore and I'm so grateful for, because if I ever do set a foot wrong, they will be there to correct me and put me back on track.
I think that's a really great point that you made as well about writing being kind of solitary activity, and sometimes it can feel like that in development as well. For writers and producers, it feels like you're spending a lot of time and money screaming into a void, and you're not sure if you know, if even if you're going to find a home for it, if you're going to find market for it, but also then, you know, after that, whether the audience are going to respond to it. So I'll take a little bit of time now to talk about the opportunity that we have with Wattpad Studios and Screen Queensland. I touched on it a little earlier, but two teams, one for each book, are going to have the opportunity to develop alongside with the Wattpad team and Screen Queensland their takes on one of the properties, and actually take that from idea to production of a proof of concept, a series of scenes, a trailer, and launch that up on the Wattpad platform for your audiences to respond to, so that they can get that direct feedback, and it can help to steer them with how to move forward with the development. And then after that feedback, we really hope to take at least one of the properties, hopefully both, and pitch it out to market, and have that really engaged audience help us attract market, because we know that the audience is already there. So what we're looking for from the writers, producers or teams that pitch in is a really clear and bold take of the work, and that will be reflected in the documentation that they have to provide. One of the most important pieces of creative that they will pitch into us with is the 10-page take, which will include a logline, a synopsis, and a statement on how you are going to adapt the original, including a strong hook, something that market might respond to. How you're going to treat the story. So you need to decide whether it's going to be a series or a feature. And I think the wonderful thing about both of these titles is that they could both work for each of those genres. Have a take on the characters. I think you both talked about some of those themes that really attracted us to the stories, in that you weren't shying away from the big issues and the big themes, and how your characters treat those themes and explore them. the world. So what are the rules of the world, and how is it the same or different from everyday life? And the tone, so any visual references that the applicants want to put in to paint a picture of the story, and really get across to the reader who will be deciding what the tone of the piece is, and taking cues, I think, from the original properties. The themes again, and how you're going to address some of those big important themes, and within that, why is it important for you to tell this story now? So we really want to connect with those applicants, and get a sense as to why they were attracted to the story, and why they want to invest in telling it, because you're both so invested as well. Speaking a little bit about the audience and the potential market. So if it were to be produced, who would watch it, and how would they watch it? A budget, so just an approximation, kind of a top line budget of how much a project like this might cost. It doesn't need to be an A to Z budget. It just needs to be an estimate, and how that might be filled out. We want to see who's in the team, so bios of you and who you want to work with, and then a proposal of how you will best pitch your idea to a Wattpad audience. So using the $50,000 that Screen Queensland will give you to produce your work, what are you going to produce? Why is that best for the audience and the fans of these books? And will it be a trailer, a short form proof of concept, a series of scenes, or a pilot? So we're really wanting people to go into lots of detail and spend some time once they've read the properties, thinking about how they're going to treat them, and blow us away with their takes. I just wanted to throw back to Wattpad, anyone there, if there's anything they want to add as to what they might be looking for as well. Maybe Eric?
I think a few things that we've learned from doing this a number of times is that we want you to have the freedom to feel that you can make this your own. We want to know what your version of this is, with all respect to Kate and Lizzie and to the source material. And I think clearly it's not going to work if you're not, as we've talked about, kind of respecting the essence of the story. But no adaptation is going to work if the creator doesn't kind of feel in their bones that they have to tell the story. So I think we will, in all of that, Amy, as you've explained, I think we'll want to see your voice and what you want to do with this project, and that should come through there. And I think another thing that we've learned from a number of book to screen adaptations is that there's a tendency on the page, you can, with a kind of inner monologue of a character, you can have a super moving, dramatized scene where the character isn't super active. They're thinking about all the emotions and feelings that happened about a scene that happened off camera, and that can be such a compelling chapter on the page. When we're translating to the screen, we have to figure out how to dramatize that. And sometimes I think in our first crack at adapting, we find that some of our vibrant characters on the page are becoming sort of passive on screen. And so I think keep in mind making our characters active, have them drive story, have a clear kind of objective and what's in their way and what they're doing to get past it.
Yeah, great tips.
Lindsay, did you have anything to add to tips?
I feel like you nailed our top two right there.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to throw back to Dia and just remind everyone that if you have any questions, we've got a few minutes left to answer a few. So just pop them in the chat for those that are listening and have that burning question.
Great, thank you, Amy. We've got some questions here. One is from Nikki Organ. She is a producer here in Queensland and says that both stories are fantastic and such a great initiative. She's wondering, are there some data-driven insights into the demographics of the readers or sorry, the fans of both stories? I know, Kate, you said earlier that new readers tend to be 13 to 17 years old. But yeah, if there's any further information about those two properties and who tends to read both of those in terms of demographics, that would be wonderful to hear more.
I can comment
Maybe
a bit about that.
Yeah, Dexter, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think sure. Just generally our platform, I would say 90% are Gen Z and millennials. And I think earlier Kate hinted about sort of, I think the two stories are quite different in terms of the age of the characters. And so Kate also sort of earlier mentioned in terms of her audience and her followers sort of have also followed her on her journey. I think she gave some insights. And so whereas I think for Lizzie, her story is a bit more skewing on the YA front of things. So I think in terms of balance, you would probably find a bit more on the spectrum of things. From our general average 90% millennial and Gen Z readership, I think the two stories sort of stand in sort of spectrums between that. Mm-hmm. I hope that's fine.
Great, thank you, Dexter. Yeah. We have another producer, Mark, over it, who has a question around the feature film After, and whether you know anything about how fans reacted to changes that were made from the original story to the screen. And yeah, so if you have any information on that.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, Mark. So here's what I could tell you. There were definitely changes. Actually, after we collided, the second one I think is a little more faithful to the book version of number 2. I think one, we had to make some bigger changes. Did the fans react to it? 100%. In fact, for After, there is nothing you can do without fan reaction, but they still went and saw the movie, some of them 5 times, literally, like they would post their 5th ticket in a row of going to see it. So I think that's a beautiful thing about fandom. If you're going to make a change, be ready to be transparent about it and talk about it, but own that change, because we all make changes for all sorts of reasons. In fact, we're shooting 3 and 4 in the series right now, and we're shooting in Bulgaria, and because of COVID, we had to change some of the cast. And there was a massive dissertation online, PhD level material written about why we did certain things one way or another. But again, we know those same fans are going to come out and support it. So it is about being respectful to the fan base, being transparent with them, and just owning the fact that there is going to be changes, because as Eric said, the words on the page don't always necessarily translate one-to-one to scenes on a screen. So the best thing you can have, I find, is when the fans want to engage, whether it's positive or negative. It means they're still showing emotion for the project we're putting together.
That's excellent advice, Aaron. And I think that speaks to the advice that's been given consistently today, which is that, you have this incredible opportunity to see into the mind of the fans, because the stories already exist, and there's an opportunity to see feedback, which really talks about engagement. It doesn't necessarily mean that you do what the fans say they like or don't like, but that it creates a visible opportunity to know what story beats have that engagement around it, and potentially form those important beats that you keep in the story, and help your understanding of what the essence of the story is, as you said before, Lindsay, as well, which I think is all such fantastic advice to take forward now for these screenwriters and producers to create their takes. I want to say a massive thank you to you all, to Aaron and Eric and Lindsay and Dexter, and especially to Elizabeth and Kate. I know you've all tuned in from many different time zones around the world and have been so generous in the information that you've shared with us today. For anybody who's watching this as a recording or who didn't get an opportunity to have their question answered, I'll just pop a little note in our chat, but you can always contact Screen Queensland via phone or email, but I think we have to let these brilliant people move on with their days and nights now. And yes, thank you all so much. It's been wonderful, and we can't wait to see what pitches come through from our industry.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thanks
having
so
us.
much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.